It's super exciting, today's conversation. It's like one of those I've been trying to figure out myself and still on that journey to find out actually how do you play this game of business and actually how do you make it work? How do you make profit and make money, cash flow happen? And I know a lot of people that listen in are, working very hard on that because it's a time in transition in our industry, the hospitality industry. And I'm actually been following Jack before I reached out to him and his team. I've been following Jack and his work through Bo Bellingham. That was a guest here on the podcast a couple of years ago, and the work through Ari. And my first introduction to this was open book management. And then I found out open book management is just part of something called the great game of business. That really changed my thinking about how do we actually make this work in real life, because there's lots of great books talk about how to build great organization, but they don't get into the nitty gritty about how do you actually do it. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what is the great game of business. So welcome to the show, Jack. It's super exciting to have you.
It's nice to be here, Michael, and thanks for everything you're doing.
Jack, for people that hasn't been in connection with Jack Stack, the work you're doing, the companies you're involved in, the training you're delivering actually to make businesses profitable and make more money. Can you give them a bit of a background? Because it is a long story, but like the download of how you actually got to play the great game of business and how you're actually now learning other companies to do the same.
I'll make it really fast because it's going back almost 50 years. 50 years ago, I worked for a Fortune 500 company, and I learned everything about how to make a good engine, and I learned how to make a good big tractor. But at the end of the day, I didn't know anything about running a business. I'd been 14 years and was getting all these raises and praises, and then I'd read in the paper about how bad the company was doing, and I couldn't make sense of. You always felt like there was something missing, right? And they were really good to me. I went to great schools, and I was on a fast track, but I did hard time. I got to be a mailboy and a scheduler, and then a frontline supervisor, and I got all the feelings of positions anybody could ever have had. So it was a great benefit to do a hard time because you got perspectives. I got hourly perspective, the waiter's perspective, the waitress perspective, and I didn't ever want anybody to look at me like that. Okay, I was like, so it was kind of breaded by the shop floor. All right, and then they promoted me to an out-of-state facility to turn it around. And this was a heavily unionized organization that I had inspired in, And I go down to this entrepreneurial company, and I fell in love with these people. They were like agricultural people. They were like, give me the tools to do the job and get the hell out of my way. And it was just a breath of fresh air. And I loved them, and I just wanted to make certain that we could sustain the organization in a period of time of the 80s when we were in the midst of a deep, deep, dark recession, our first recession, right? And ultimately, our company filed. We didn't file for bankruptcy. We were days away, but they were selling assets like crazy to survive, and they were going to sell us that little factory. And we decided to see if the employees wanted to make a run at buying the factory. And we didn't know anything about it. All we knew was we were on the brink of closing, and I was the plant manager, and I had to lay 260 people off. And it was petrifying. And I just didn't, I didn't have the courage to be able to do that. And I also was like in my early 30s and didn't want it on my resume. What's your biggest thing that you accomplished? Well, I shut down a factory with 200. And this is a period of time where they're honoring, Chainsaw L. Dunlap, okay, because these guys would cut heads that would then increase stock prices. And so now I'm in this little factory and I'm making engines, and I'm really good at making an engine. And, I can compare it with everybody else, and I could have a sense of pride. But again, I felt that there was something missing, and the International Harvester then notified us that they're going to either close us or put it on the market for sale. So we let an employee buyout, and we went to the bank to try to raise money, because when you work for big companies all your life, you don't have any money. And I brought my engine. All I knew was how to build an engine. Okay, I didn't know how to build a company. And I had been through all kinds of Ollie White schools. I had been through Deming. I had been through Lean Tokyo management procedures. Okay, and it was still not fulfilling. And the irony of every time a new fad came along, the employees would look at me and say, don't look at this new idea, okay, because they're going to die in 6 months. We're going to come up with a whole new philosophy on how we're going to get together and get into the promised land, right? So I went there, and the bank just laughed their ass off, okay, and they just basically said, son, we're going to need more than your ability to save jobs in an engine, okay? And then I said, well, what do I need? So, well, we need a business plan, and we need to know sales and marketing, and we need to know these balance sheets. And, they need to know, can I leverage my receivables? And they talked about, what's my days of cash flow relative to payables? And, they started to talk about a whole new way of looking at something that I had never been involved in, okay? I began to realize that in the banking community and the financial and the capital communities, they only look at specifications of a product. They don't really care about your restaurant. They don't really care about your you want to save the world attitude. Okay. They got rigid specifications that they live by. Okay.
Mm.
And so it dawned on me that I had spent 14 years learning how to do a product when the product was the company. Okay.
Mm.
Now, remember, I came from manufacturing. Manufacturing, man, you just are taught differently and faster. And you combine a lot of crap together to be able to come up with something better at the end. You look at doing 3 things at one time. That's your mindset, right? So I'm sitting there trying to figure out, why do we have 2 systems? Why am I asking my employees to build an engine when I really wanted to build a company? Okay. So I thought, and again, I learned by trial and error because I kept getting denied the loan. Right, I went to over 50 financial institutions because in 1982, interest rates were 22% at its height, and there was no capital available. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about the capital market, so I'm like hitting my head in a marketplace that nobody's lending money, or if you could get money, the best you could probably get was at 14 to 18%. But my God, you had to put your family up on collateral. So I would get denied. And every time I got denied, I began to realize, this doesn't change. These specifications, okay, they were invented by the Venetian monks in the 1400s. They haven't changed, and they affect billions and billions of lives. That all of a sudden, if you lose a margin or your inventory or your overhead is not absorbed, okay, or you can't pay enough to pay the bills, somebody suffers. All right. Somebody has to take a hit. All right. So, and I thought, wow, it'd be crazy. I promised God at the end of like my 10th interview at the bank that if I had never gotten this business, I am sure as hell going to teach people the specifications of a business. Because if they learn the specifications of a business, they will be able to sustain. We will eliminate things like fears and layoffs and failures, and we will all be working together to be able to attack what is really important to attack. And that is capital. And then what you do with the capital after that, okay? And why should I be sitting there making these plans and then locking them up in a vault and then going out to my people and say, let me teach you how to build a good engine, right? Why don't I teach them the cost inside the engine, the expenses, and then can I show them shortcuts on how to read a ratio? That when you do your financial and you got a bad ratio, you know exactly what you need to do. Instead of then managing people, what I want them to do is to manage the system. Okay. Because I didn't believe that the charismatic leadership was sustainable. I just don't. All right. Maybe God or Jesus, and that is like they'll make a case for it. Okay. But typically, Jack Welch was a hero at one time, and then we just destroy him later on after he dies or after he leaves. Okay. But I do think what is sustainable is a system. And that's what like Deming and all those other gurus taught us. Okay. That the idea is to be able to get everybody to buy into the system, and then we're all working to improve the system. And then when we get a deviation or variance to the system, that's what we correct together. Okay. And collectively, we're working on the things that need to be fixed because things need to be fixed every single year because the world constantly changes. So the idea was that if we can create this, if we can learn it, I sure as hell can teach my janitor learn, my maintenance guy learn it. And ironically, on February 1st of 1983, we were able to get the business. Okay. And we got it by divine intervention. Okay. We just got in with a bad bank that was booking bad loans. All right. Which then I tell a lot of MBA students, I said, guys, if you got a bad go to a bad bank. Okay. Don't waste your time going to safe, good banks because they're safe for a reason, right? And I got into a bank that was spinning out of control. And we booked an 89-to-1 debt to equity buyout, which is still one of the highest debt to equity buyouts in the history of a business. Okay. In other words, the company, the employees could raise 100,000 and we borrowed 9 million on 100,000. So it's like 80.
Wow, man.
The irony of it is it was a 14% interest on the 8.9. Okay. My first year, we owed 1,050 on interest expense alone, right? But here's something really interesting. When we taught them the interest expense on the inventory, okay, that was their first move, was to figure out how to reduce the inventory, and therefore I could figure out how to save on the interest expense, and then maybe I could have a little interest expense to put into the employees' pockets because they hadn't gotten raises in 3 years because we were in an economic downturn, right? So like within 6 months, they dropped $2 million of the inventory. We saved, $360,000 interest expense. They take $100,000 and they give it in the bonus pool to the employees. Okay. And the employees now are beginning to figure out financial statements. We begin to trick them into learning. Okay. Where they automatically connect to the financial statements and they create the psychic ownership of the line. My organization set their own standards. Okay. Because we taught them that in order to set a standards, you got to go look at the competition. You got to figure out the data. It's not too hard. When I was a kid, I worked for a guy named Manny Berg and just folding clothes. And Manny would send me down to the other men's clothing store. And they go, he said, count the number of people in the store. And then I go back to Manny. And I'd say, Manny, there's 4 guys in the store. And Manny looked at me and said, did you ask them why they were in the store? He taught me that that you can figure out what you got to do to compete, right? I don't need to have a time study engineer to go out there, okay, to be able to fight with the employee that sits there and turns to you and says something like, if you think you can do it that fast, why can't you do it that fast? The idea is to motivate the person to realize that somebody's doing it better than they're doing it, and how do we figure out how to be better, right? So we use the whole idea of building an operating system, okay, where we would figure out how to accelerate the learning process to teach people to get it, to what we learned by seeking capital, that they want these ratios. They want to see the extension of cash and how it flows from the supply chain all the way to the customer, and then how you're going to distribute it back to the associates, okay, and how much you're going to put away. It's an unbelievably beautiful system, okay, and it's beautiful from the standpoint is that it hasn't changed. It's going to be timeless. So I'm sitting there going, if I've got to do this every single quarter, or I got to do this every single year, okay, why don't I just have everybody else do it?
Yeah, and so actually the whole idea was, born out of real pain. Yeah, you needed to think very differently to turn that situation around. Yeah,
real life. I mean, it's like 9 times out of 10, you go there and the banker's asking you the same questions in terms of your financial plan. You begin to realize I can understand this stuff. Okay, if it doesn't change, I can understand it.
So, Jack, at the core, what is the great game of business around? Is an operating system to help employees to better understand numbers and act on them, or is it?
I wanted to teach them how to be able to read financial statements, right? And they balked at it at the very beginning. They go, "No, it's not my job, man. I don't want to pay any attention to this kind of stuff." And about the first 6 months, I really felt that it was they were lazy. I'll admit to it, right? But then when I started to bear down after we got that first big bonus program and I got a bonus check because they figured out how to conquer a financial ratio, I had them for a while, right? So that's when I went in and said, look, business is no different than fantasy football. It's no different than building a brownie, okay? There are rules, there are scorecards, and there are outcomes, okay? So let's break this thing down and let's start talking about the financials as a game, not a financial mountain that they had to understand and they had to pick through or they had to climb through, okay? It's kind of simple. You're not going to get into a game without any rules. The marketplace sets the rules. We don't have anybody that's been interested in understanding the marketplace. If you don't understand the marketplace, you're going to get run over. So let's figure out how to build part of a system to bring the market to the people. Then the second step is we got scorecards. So let's take down these crazy housekeeping scores that we're evaluating people, and let's put some type of return on invested capital that they could see on a constant basis. And then what they'll do is they'll begin to pick it apart, because once they begin to ask the questions, then you got them. Then you've got the fear. See, I thought they were lazy, and I found out it was nothing more than fear. Our people have been trained that they're not allowed to see those statements, that God will strike them with lightning if they even talk about them. We have SEC regulations that are ludicrous in terms of we protect people from trading, not from education, so we say you can't see these things. And yet we want them to do that thing that we can't show them that they need to see. And so that's the idea of just taking the Band-Aid off. Okay. And so I use the analogy of the game so that they would be confident that they could understand it. Is a trick. I mean, it started out to be a trick. All right. With the idea, then in the middle of these three circles, okay, you've got a critical number, which is the people. Okay. In the center of this is the people. Okay. What are we doing it for? Right. So we develop ways of high involvement planning through the rules circle. The scorecards were easy, okay, because they already had them all there, right? I mean, the government, we got the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. We don't need any more scorecards. And then, we had wages, benefits, bonus programs, equity programs as the reward system, right? So it was easy then to be able to go out and say, look, you can play this game. It was a comforting factor, which was really funny, because here's what happened, Michael. It was totally accepted by the hourly and salary people, okay? It was the middle management and the executive that turned on Bo and I really early when the book came out, okay? And that it was hierarchy. It was like you're degrading business by calling it a game, and it was like, man, we took a lot of abuses. And but the idea came because we were using that phrase all the time, okay? Business is no different than baking brownies. You got ingredients, okay? You got it. I mean, it's like just get them into something that was a routine from it. And then we began to figure out you got to have this spread over a disciplined period of time, and you got to have specific dates and times where you need to have the data flowing. And so we built an operating system that was that just is efficient. You don't stop and do something. You're doing it while you're moving and while you're thinking. And we began to run numbers through people's heads, and all of a sudden they got involved in knowing where they made a difference, because when their number moved, they could see that it made an impact on everybody else. That was the neatest part of the scorecards, because you fit it in somewhere. There was an end to what you were always trying to figure. You always tell people where they make a difference. Well, if you're a buyer and you have a purchasing price variance on your income statement, your whole organization made a difference. Okay. Every line on that income statement balance sheet became a person to me. It became a critical. Okay. And here I was writing these accountabilities, job descriptions. God almighty, how many people invented these things to evaluate people? And what's clearer than the standard that they set and the variance that they have to the income statement? So they come together as a team. It becomes a playbook. All right. I mean, if you see your margin deteriorating because of tariffs, okay, it's so easy to talk to your people is that we got to put a defensive posture against the tariffs. All right, we're at war. Figure out it's going to affect your purchase price variance. And then what we found out is that when we had these, like, instead of just having staff meetings, became huddles. We huddled off the playbook. It was no different than a publicly held company giving information to shareholders. Legally, a publicly held company has got to what? Every quarter give them financial data and material significance relative to the company 4 times a year, right? Well, shit, why isn't it a huddle? I said, my God, let's do that. Let's our huddle set 15 minutes of finance, 15 minutes of material significance that's going to affect the health of the company going forward. So we used in the huddles every Wednesday, a little repetitive action, because in order to be able to drive culture and behavior, we came to the conclusion it had to be repetition. But Michael, the repetition has to be exciting. The people go to work and they get bored. So we have all this overheaded boredom okay, then we're not utilizing. So I wanted to capture, I wanted to capture the intelligent part of the worker. Okay, I didn't want to capture the thing that they get bored with after 2 hours they're in business, because we created an assembly process and we expect them to be able to really feel like they're really doing something of value. Okay. But so what happened was they all began to feel better about themselves, and we began to really see the benefits of it. And then we went a couple of years, and then somebody asked us to give a speech at a HR conference. And I gave a speech on a conference that most of our bonus programs are based on the financial statements. And they said, you mean hourly and salary? I go, yeah. I said, why not? I mean, we're all trying to get the same goal. And they thought that was revolutionary. And this lady came up and said, you want to write a book? I said, lady, I can't write a sentence. I can't write a sentence. I want to know how to book. And I think she said, well, if we offer you $75,000, would you write the book? And I go, when do you want this book? And then Bo and I got together, and we took 3 years to put this thing together. And then it went out to the marketplace. And then all of a sudden, the operating system became more of an operating system. We opened up our books to our people, and then we began to open up our company to the public. We didn't have anything sophisticated at the time, so they call you up after they read the book, and we said, yeah, come in. And then you would be surprised how many visitors we have. And then the visitors had to be organized, because somebody would come into town and say, well, you're going to pick me up at the airport? You're going to give me a hotel? This is getting out of control. And so then we actually started a company called The Great Game of Business to be able to allow people to find out anything we're doing, okay? That we're a living lab. You can go talk to the hourly person and ask them if they know what the capital was that they are responsible for in the return. You can ask them anything, because we don't care if we're bad or we made a mistake. I mean, it's just another methodology of fixing what it is you need to be fixed. So people would come in here and they go, how do I bring this home? Okay. How do I just take this out of here and put it back into my factories? Okay. And we're sitting there going, oh my God, it's just, you learn the income statement, you learn the balance sheet, you'll talk about this to somebody else, and then they'll talk about it to somebody, and you'll find out they're interesting. And, and that loss of capacity you have when they're boring, you're now going to appeal to a higher level of thinking. And even your associates are going to be excited. And we're going to have quarterly reviews, okay? And we're going to give them bonus programs every single quarter, because they know what they're doing in order to be able to create the security of the company. So, I don't know. We've been doing this for 42 years. We've spun out 70 businesses in that particular period of time.
Wow.
But the operating system, Michael, became more in a business, because all of a sudden our community started to use the operating system. My local government used the operating system, and they realized that, why are we having our meetings and not inviting the public? What if we opened up the books to the public? Maybe the public would no longer think that we do nothing more than just lean on a shovel. Because I went and talked to the county, and I asked them, I said, why? I said, you have any idea who supports your revenue? 200 county workers. Not one of them knew that it was a business and a sales tax that affected. And I said, why don't you write the next new business a thank you note, for giving me 2 more jobs or a percentage? They didn't see it. Okay. So to this day, we've got a Greene County that's running a surplus in terms of their balance sheets. That's got some of the lowest debt ratios on S&P that you can imagine, because of their improvements on their financials. It's like, so it took off. It became an operating system that all of a sudden went from the business to our people's families, and our family lives changed drastically. Okay. Because, let me tell you something that what we do here. Every year we give them their stock certificates. Okay. And in the stock certificate, we give them a balance sheet. And in the balance sheet, we give them 2 things: their actual 401ks and their stock price. And we say to them, now go home and talk to your family, put all your assets together, and then look at your net worth. Okay. And what's incredible is that, you've got a player in your company when you come in and say, my net worth improved 22% this year. When you get people talking about their net worth, okay, what did we teach them? We taught them, stay out of debt, build an asset. Okay, don't outrun your assets. Okay, everybody gets in trouble because they're spending because they think they're going to make a bigger salary later on. It's going to catch up, and they never catch up the rest of their lives. They began to understand budgets. Okay, we have family financial meetings for all the employees so they can understand their own checkbooks. So it became an operating system that went to the company, to the people, and then to the community. And our community here is, I would say there's maybe 30 companies here that play the game just in Springfield, Missouri. And this companies just became one of the most worship company. What do they do? They pick the best companies to work for in America. One of them, this 2 weeks ago, just was nominated as one of the best companies to work for. But it works, Michael. Michael, it works.
Yeah, and in the book you also talk about some of the other success story, and I think it's really interesting to talk about the employee's net worth, and you talk about a very, very good way of looking at it. If an employee can own their house outright, yeah, if you can help an employee with that, and many of them do, as I understand from the book and from what you're saying now.
Yeah, the ones that, when we said that at the very beginning, every one of those people for sure, but now we're up to 2,000 people, and we got new people coming in all the time, but most people are leave and they retire are retiring big, big.
And what have you seen like with the operating system, which is the book, The Great Game Business is all about? What have you seen as you have spread that outside Missouri? Because like it's a known system, in the US, but it's also a European company. And Ari from the Singermans has been on the show. They use open book management as a very clear tool as well to make. He calls about, I want to make my employees business owners. Yeah. I want them to
think and act like an owner.
Yeah. But what do you see in the effect of that work? Because that must almost be bigger than what you ever could have expected, isn't it? Like, I think
it's around the world. I mean, it is around the world. I mean, I feel bad that I've been asked to come over to the UK so frequently, and I just haven't been able to do it. We put it into a coal mine in Africa. Okay. A country has adopted it. Zambia picked it up because, 85% of their GDP is just making copper. All right. There's 55,000 people working, supporting 9 million people. Okay. I mean, it's incredible. But once they understand what it is they can do and what they have to do, all of a sudden, then big things begin to change. You get that buy-in, you get that participation. I mean, just that little example I was telling you about a copper mine in Zambia. When we went over there and we looked at it and we began to look at it from a business, not just making copper. I think the biggest example that I witnessed in working with so many companies was there was a guy that had an unbelievable knack of separating dirt and ore and iron, right, and copper. And it takes, how people have some kind of specialties and some people are going to be more productive than others, okay? But this guy was an alcoholic, okay, and he'd only come in like on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and I went out there and I said, Hadunka, you're killing us, man. And I said, you're the highest producing guy. I said, we're losing a fortune when you're not here. And Hadunka looks at me and goes, oh, look, there's not any money. And I go, what do you mean? He said, as long as the copper's in the ground, he goes, we ain't losing any money. He just didn't have the concept, all right? And it's everywhere you went in this business that affected 9 million people. Okay. So when you began to teach people, Hadunka, you don't understand the overhead that's standing around here we're waiting to absorb. You don't understand that we missed 2 days worth of sales every week because you're not here. Okay. Because he was only trained to think about our country has 90 years of copper, and we're going to be really secure because of the resources that we have. It's just, I see it all the time. And it's so easy to fix.
And you already touched on it before, how you build culture, but why do you think, open book management specifically and the repetition is such a powerful culture change? Because often when you read a lot of business books, it's about employee engagement, it's about leadership style or organization, but you didn't you decentralized and you involved the people. But it doesn't seem like this dramatic change of organizational structure.
Yeah, I engaged them because I gave them something smart to talk about. All right. I used it as a common language. I mean, what I find really, really interesting is when somebody comes in and tours and they want to go talk to the associates, just hearing the different speak, okay? Just to hear the different language, and okay, so maybe I walk out a little bit pride about, God, I really love the way that person is talking about it as a business, and as a future, okay, as the expectations of what could be, okay, versus somebody coming in there saying, boy, I'm trying to dig myself out of a hole here. How can I figure out what to do? Okay, it was like, I see these things every single day, and I just see the morale, and I see the contribution. I see when they stumble, how they know how to pick themselves up and to be able to take a punch, I mean, those are the things that people need in life. Okay. They need to be able to get through those pain points, and they need to understand that there are avenues by which you can fix, that you can eliminate the pain points to get to what it is you want to get to. But if a business person wants to get to creating an outrageously successful company, why wouldn't you want everybody to have buy-in? And then why wouldn't you tell people, well, here's your report card that you really need to analyze yourself if you're going to create this outrageous, if you want the outrageously successful company, this is what you have to do to do it, right? Kind of in a box.
If you should get an example, like a really low practical example, because now I'm thinking the audience here, they run restaurants or hotel businesses, lots of frontline employees, very similar, catering business, very similar as your own business. Many of them are thinking about they have to deliver a service or product. That's what they're focusing on. They're not thinking about financial. How would you do this? Like, how do you actually get it started, and how do you get people on that journey with the numbers? What are like the steps you took? And it's in the book.
I work with Outback Steakhouse, okay, and we worked with them many years ago, and they were some of our keynote speakers at some of our conferences, and it was really kind of simple. They just created a franchise. They let the person have a buy-in at 50,000. Then they also had them associated with the parent company, but basically, they created a sense of ownership right from the very beginning when they put up an Outback Steakhouse in a town, right? Then what they did is they began to teach the people the business aspect of the restaurant. In other words, Outback Steakhouse figured out in a typical restaurant, one waitress has 4 tables, right? They said, well, listen, if we had 3 tables and they were working those tables, could we talk them into a higher ticket price? Could we get a better margin if we gave them more attention? And all of a sudden the marketplace had 4 tables. They decided to go to 3. And what do you think the first thing they were trained as? And if the person came in and said, what's really good here? Well, you know what I'd have said? The highest margin product that I got in the menu, right? Okay. So then we went back and they had their own little income statements for their tables, for their section. So we just created that they were running their own little business, right? And then they went back and then they calculated after every day, what the ticket revenue price was and what the margins were by the margins that were established at the beginning of the year, and food prices changes and things of this nature. Okay. But you got a pretty good idea how much money you make on a dessert, but how many people is really working on the dessert? Most people go in there and go, oh, you probably had a lot and you really don't probably need dessert, but I got to give you this menu and show you that we got dessert. Oh, man, if I'm figuring out how I'm going to, now listen, here's another thing we did is that you got to celebrate, because too many people wait for the big celebration, and I celebrate every minute, right? Me winning is about a ton of wins, right? So they would go out, and if you ever looked at a Outback Steakhouse employees, they had a vest, and the vest was loaded with pins. Okay? Okay? It was just loaded with pins, right? And it was because of the little wins that they would create, okay, in a given week or a given month. You can use it for anything, but just people wanted to be recognized, but recognize when their 3 tables were highly profitable. Now, let me tell you what happens when you get a really, really happy person waiting on customers. What happens? The customers come back. Okay. They want to see the person that really want a little bit extra, because they were trying to create a great restaurant. I mean, that's all they were trying to do. And it worked. And they created a tremendous franchise. And they built it around the fact that they only wanted to play golf. And so they opened it up at 4, closed it at 10. I mean, it was like, I've been in, I think restaurants, I love people that play the game inside the restaurants just are remarkably successful all the way through the customer service side of it. Because when that employee feels really, really good and they really understand what it's all about, they're your salesman. All right. I started a bank. Okay. Who do you think the most important person is in a bank?
Well, the person in the front, the cashier, will call people the teller, yeah?
Who is the least paid person in the bank?
The teller.
So I'm just there going, we started we got the tellers' houses by the time we sold the bank. Because they were the gatekeepers. So when you're going through a high volatility of changes in interest rates, you capitalize on fees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you stand at, when we sold the bank, my wife wanted to kill me because she loved the person that was at the drive-through window. Okay. Well, the person at the drive-through window was playing in a much bigger game than any teller that walked through because they had skin in the game. Okay. So we would run a bonus program. We give them $150 that we can send somebody up the mortgage. Okay. They were just not taking a deposit and giving them a cashier's check or a return. They're talking about the benefits of the bank. Okay. And they said, well, I just noticed the fact that the interest rates went down. Have you gone and seen Aaron? Okay. Because if you go see Aaron, you could probably say 0.5 point on your existing mortgage. And it was like cutting butter. It was like, why don't more people do this?
And it's so interesting in the book and the work you've done. And you talk about, the huddle is really a key thing. The weekly get together of the people from the shop floor, yeah? Going through the numbers, and celebrating and learning and so on. Can you just give a little touch on what's actually happening there? Because I think lots of companies, they don't do that. They bring the employees together 3 times a year.
Okay, the system goes like twice a year. We bring the marketplace to the people, and we put our sales and marketing people in front of everybody, hourly salary people, and say, this is the 12-month plan. This is the 5-year plan. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to explain what they're going to do in order to be able to attain that plan. And then the hourly and salary people vote on the plan. Okay. All right. So we got the playbook, right? And maybe we got 87% participation or approval. And more recently, now we've been also now trying to figure out what does the 13% know that we really haven't been calculating on. See, what the game keeps teaching you is to learn one more thing. Okay. This is incredible. You want to have innovation in your organization. Why wouldn't the innovation be centered around the company, not necessarily the product? Okay. So innovation really gets going a lot quicker, okay, when you're looking at it from an institutional standpoint than trying to figure out how to be able to develop a new circuit board or a new opportunity. Those things would come after the fact, okay? But I think I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
It was around the huddles, Jack, where you talk about repetition, and I think it's one of the most powerful thing in the whole system.
You got it, but you got to have the playbook first, right?
Yeah. So you need to have the starting point is the playbook, the plan.
Yeah. And then that's the budgets, okay, and that's the what the operating statement's going to look like on a monthly basis. And now you go into the first week of the new year, okay, and it's no different than a huddle in a sports event. We go, okay, this is the place for this particular month. How does everybody stand against what their projection was? We actually put projections together. There's something very, very powerful. Like in our first foray into open book management, when I bought the company, and my colleagues bought the company from the International Harvester, we were so naive that we got cut off of our IT system, okay, and didn't know it, right? So here we buy the company. I go to work the next day, and I can't even turn the lights on. I got to deal with payroll. And then the banks are mad because they found out they booked a bad deal, okay? So now they want cash flow statements all the time. So I then said, okay, guys, I brought the people in, and I said, here's the income statement. Let's go around the room, and you are going to tell me how to fill this out. And I went to Bob and I said, Bob, what is the sales line for November? Or let's say January. And Bob would look at me and go, well, everyone never asked me to provide a sales forecast. Okay. He goes, I just a formula selling. I said, I know my job is to contact 11 people a day, 7 old people, 4 new people. I'm supposed to DVD. I said, no, Bob, you're responsible for the sales line. All right. And it's almost like I had to tattoo Bob and realize that, Bob, on every huddle on, you have to go up there and post the sales line. I actually got them. I had a blackboard, and they went up and Bob goes 1.5. Okay, fine. That's great. They said, okay, accounting. I said, you guys had cost of bill of materials. You estimated cost. What's the cost? And then the accounting look at me and they go, okay, yeah, we can't disclose this. So then the accounting goes up and posts the COGS line. Now you break down COGS. You break it down into purchasing. You break it down into overhead. You break it down into all the general accounts. And I found out there was a person responsible for every one of the lines on the income statement. So that became the huddle. Now, the idea is that everybody thinks that's a long period of time, but I guarantee you one thing, when you own that line, you live it. You live it every day. So you go into the huddle, everybody looks at where we're going to stand at the end of the month. Everybody commits to it. If some people can't make it, you'll be surprised how many people will help them out to do better in terms of what it is, because they're all interested in the outcome. But more important, Michael, is that they can see where they fit together. That now purchasing knows why you have to have marketing and why you need to have engineering and why you need to be working together as a team, because it's the income statement that really brings the entire team together. And it knocks down these walls, okay, that we used to throw hand grenades over, yelling because we didn't want the department to know what it was we're doing. So our huddle is very, very, very fast. It's 30 minutes, it's 15 minutes about financials on what's going to happen by the end of the month. And then it's anything of material significance that's happening inside of the company. That's the huddle. And it's basically off the playbook that they have. And we don't change the playbook. We'll change the opinions, but we do stay against the master plan. And we only change the master plan once a year, but they change it when we sit there and we give them the data from the marketplace to be able to determine where they're at. So,
yeah, so the employee builds on the playbook, then they take the playbook and operationalize on a weekly level and follow and see if they
know their balance sheets, they know their cash flow, and at the end of the day, when you close the books, you're probably greater than 95% accuracy across the board. And 95% accuracy would be low. Okay. I mean, they really hit it in the high 90s because there's a lot of peer pressure in open book, right? I mean, you don't want to go into a huddle and say, oh man, guys, the tariffs are killing me. That's going to get the other guys to be able to do their jobs. That guy's got to figure the tariff problem out as fast as he possibly can, right? He let somebody else down.
So in principle, the group works through the issues as well, I guess, then because Absolutely. Then everybody's working on the same problem and say, okay, this is the problem. Let's get together and actually then, as you say, you break down the barriers, because often what it is, there's a war between sales and operation, and hereby actually you are suddenly in the same boat. Yeah. And it's very clear, if you don't go in and help with your abilities and skills, then you'll lose out in the end. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people are afraid to admit failures, which is really bad. Here, we don't shoot somebody for a failure. We think that the team could very possibly help somebody at a given period of time, because we're always going to have our ups and downs, right? I mean, you don't go in there if you got a hot hand and you're meeting your number every day for 42 weeks, okay? Because you know that one door is going to slam in your face, and the people are going to pile on you, okay? You really just want to make absolutely certain as you're close to the mark as you possibly can, because other people are playing off your mark, right? They're playing off what you say that you're going to sell or what we're going to make it for. Okay. This is a combination of everybody having input to be able to create that outrageously successful company. You need everybody.
And one of the things that's very interesting, what I often see is, so I grew up in McDonald's, those clear standards and procedures for everything. Also the financial statement, this is how P&L is, this is how it works.
Yeah.
And then I came out in other businesses and found out there's no standards here, or what is the standard?
Right.
And everybody had a different view. And I think you talk a lot about this shared understanding about what the standard is. And actually every business has different standards. Like, some people talk about industry standards where they, let's say, labor is 35%, but I often say, well, it can't be, because you have to understand yours and what actually makes yours up.
I'll give you an example of that. I mean, if you want an example, I mean, obviously cash flow is really important at the beginning of every company. Okay, so one of the biggest, accumulator of cash is inventories.
Mm.
And if you want, if you really want to get competitive data, all you got to do is buy one share of stock of a publicly held company that's in your market. And they give you all the data. They give you all the ratios. Okay. I mean, it's already there. So I get one share of stock on a competitor, right? And then I take what our people say their plans are, their ratios, and then I compare it against the other customer, right? So in this one particular instance, my people improved their inventory turns to 6 from 4. Hell, you'd go out there and that's really a big turn. Okay. That's going to generate some really significant cash. But I just happened to look at the company in Indiana and they were turning 10. And I go, what? How can you turn 10? So we go back to the people in the organization saying, guys, it's really impressive to do 6. Okay. But these guys are doing 10. I said, let's figure out what they're doing. Right. So our people are obviously, they always tell you these things, but now here's what happens. They go out and they find out that the Indiana company decided to talk their supply chain into consigning the inventory and that they would only use it out of their consignment. And you know what our people did? They came back saying, how could they do that? Okay, why didn't they do that to us? And so then they go back and they say, can we have those? Or no, they didn't. No, they didn't. They were more aggressive. So how come you're giving it to Indiana? You're not giving it to us. And you know what the supplier said? You didn't ask.
Yeah, you don't get what you don't ask for. Yeah, that's
you didn't ask. No, you wouldn't ask. So now the supplier was indignant because he felt that we were kind of we didn't approach it right. So he made us eat our inventory before we consign it. Okay, but that was as a fix, right? You can see and then we went to a 10 inventory turn.
That's a super interesting way because to buy your competitor share, then you still need to understand if you're ahead or behind the standard. Yeah.
Yeah. All you want to do is teach people what market is, right? What's the market sales expense what are they investing in sales to sell? What's their M&A expenses? Okay. What's their warranty expenses? All that data is there,
And you talked about, you build a incredible amount of companies. You're running the great game of business, which is principle the learning center for how you can do this in yourself. And actually, I saw there was the yearly summit was coming up soon. And how many companies are playing the game now? You would say on a regular basis, of there's actually.
I've heard everything between 5 and 10,000 is what I've heard. Is what they've calculated. I mean, our file has got 10,000 companies in it, but, I think the book sold, I don't know how many copies the book sold. Book has a tendency to get people involved in it. You don't even know they're getting involved in it. That's kind of weird, I mean, there's people out there I don't know that I'll run into. My first reaction is, I hope it worked for you. Don't hurt me. Don't hurt me.
You're a very humble man, Jack, on that.
And too many failures. Okay, that's the interesting thing about it is that I just haven't seen. Michael, I keep coming back to the fact is that if you're looking for something to really motivate your workforce and to be able to differentiate yourself in terms of the marketplace, it's people. That's what's going to be the talent. The talent of the future is going to determine the valuations of companies.
Yeah, and something you just made me remember as well, because this week I dived a little bit back into the book, and you talk about, the problem is your job is to create productivity in the business, yeah? And you can only do that by engage people. And people often think engage people is a communication task, but actually back to what we talked about earlier, is learning them to become business people, because people really want to run their own businesses. A lot of people do even that, especially in the restaurant industry. A lot of people talk about that, but very few break out of that because, or they maybe get their first restaurant and it's a huge failure because they didn't learn the income statement. Right.
Or they didn't use a waitress that controlled the 4 tables.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't know
there. That's where your productivity, right there. You could just go out there and take an order, or you could create an uptick, upsell, improvement in a margin, a ticket price and maybe a relationship going forward. It drives me crazy. I go in a restaurant, I see them, they constantly saying, okay, you can have table 6 and then you can have table 14 and you can have, and they come in through this revolving door. I go, why wouldn't you just give them 4 tables and, let them be your marketers too? Give them a business card. Okay. And then give them business cards out of the 4 tables. So people will come back to see the people that are in the restaurant.
Yeah.
That's what Ari does. Okay.
Yeah. And I love that idea again, because it's like micro businesses within the business again. Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head, right? You break everything down into a income statement or a profit center. And that's where you get the innovation. If we create it on their own, because they'll see the difference they'll make in terms of the bottom line.
Jack, if there was one question you wished I've asked you, what would it be and what would you answer?
Well, if it's so good, how come more people aren't doing it?
Great question.
And my answer is, I don't know. I hate to, you asked me for the truth. Okay. I don't know, Michael. I think there's dirty secrets in business. I get all that stuff. Again, I do think that, some people are buying a building and taking the rent off the books, and, and there's family-owned companies, which are a tragedy when I look at them, about how members of the family are on payrolls and things of this nature. I mean, they're dirty secrets that people don't want to share. But to me, I think the CEOs just don't know. I think they rely on their accountant and they rely on their lawyer. And the lawyer and the accountant is only paid to give safe answers. They're not paid to take risks. And I can't believe that something like the accounting community is so intolerant, okay, of being teachers, okay. All right, I can't believe HR people don't know, okay, and which is really a tragedy, okay. So you're not going to get much help out of your HR department. So you have your executive staff that probably cannot read the statements and don't want to admit them.
Yeah, and how common do you actually think that is? Because that's a really interesting angle, that like a lot of executive people, they might have touched on financial statement in a very short period in business school, but they have never actually really understand what actually runs the
So they don't know how to play the game. We can't play the game with us,
So it's pure luck, some of it, yeah?
But I think that it's traditional. I think there are definitely family-owned businesses, 50-year-old companies, 100-year-old companies that have developed the brand and have been very successful without sharing financials. I get all that. I mean, there's other ways of running business out there, but my biggest concern is the failure rate of business in the U.S. especially is so terrible. Okay, so let's say they say that 15% of the businesses last 5 years, right? Then our failure. Someone told me there's like 600,000 businesses that start here in the United States every year, and then X amount, 85% of them fail, right? So why aren't we working on the failures? All right. Why we're pumping people full of shit, telling them they could be entrepreneurs, okay, without even to determine whether they have the grit to be an entrepreneur, okay, let alone the education to understand what it is what your outcome's going to be, right? I mean, all these people that are starting companies, and they come to me and they ask me to put these back in. It's too late in a lot of cases. And I go, well, where did you get this? They say, well, I went to the entrepreneurial school of so-and-so and came out there. And I go, well, did they teach you about the report cards? Did they teach you about how to evaluate the game that you're in? No. And, it's killing me because I do think that we have a literacy rate in the United States, our literacy rate is calculated at 66%, and it hasn't changed annually for 30 years. Okay. It's done by FINRA, which is the official accounting service. They ask 5 simple questions and we fail the most important questions that everybody should learn. Okay. Well, I'm only dealing with 33% of the people that can even figure out what we're talking about. Okay. I mean, to talk to someone that is basically financially illiterate, you really got to go figure out what is the education process to get them to get it. And why wouldn't we be institutionalizing this in our school systems, okay, to eliminate poverty and to eliminate all the problems that we have as a result of illiteracy? And I finally came to the conclusion that it's going to be business. Business do it. And so that's why we do it. That's why we open up our hearts to people saying, we'll help you. We'll do anything we possibly can. But be a teacher. Pass it on. Okay, learn from this. And look under, if you don't believe it, come down here and look under the hood. There is an engine running this car, okay? Yeah, we're just not pushing it on stage without an engine in it, right?
What's ahead for you, Jack, and the team? What's coming up? What's any big things you're working on?
I do think we now realize that we're putting it into an LMS process, right? And I do think there's going to be a downturn in 2030. And I do think in 2030s, what happens, you basically cut back on consulting and training, and people aren't going to be able to travel and budgets. But I do think in order for it to sustain itself, it's got to have a lower cost entry point. And so we're spending a lot of money with our trainers and our developers to be able to put it in such a digital form and it's a lot of work. I mean, and it's big. I mean, it's big if you can figure out how to get it. And it's cost, because I think if you have a downturn, you better have a cost-effective product if you want the mission to continue. So right now, I would say that a lot of our concentration is to be able to come up with the deliverables that are least expensive than associates, because we're also not going to be able to get as many coaches and we're not going to get as many trainers. So right now we have a really, really great game of business, and we really do very, very well with training and coaching and on property experiences. But we got to digitize that, So that's where we're at the moment. Make it easier for people if they want to do it, But somewhere along the line, we got to figure out how to keep sending the message that you got to want to, right? That's what you're doing. I love what you're doing. You're helping us just create the you got to want to.
Yeah, and then so important that you get a wanna. We haven't even talked about, because actually that's the starting point for everything in life. I learned that from my dad. The first thing is that you have to want to do it. Yeah, well, it's not going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, Jack. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your story, your learnings, and I'm sure you inspired a lot of people out there. We send a lot of power and energy to you and the team there. But if people want to connect with you, where's the best place to connect with the Great Game
Go greatgamebusiness.com. Go right there to the Great Game. It's all over. You can get free information. You can get messages on success stories of other people. We've got hundreds and hundreds of people that have written up what has happened to them and how it's changed their lives. We got case studies, that you can read. We've got simple training pamphlets that we've got. We'll do anything we possibly can to make absolutely certain that you at least take a look at it. And we find out that most of the people that do it, they knew it was in their heart anyways. That they just didn't know that it was okay to do. That the success of the book Between Bo and I was not rocket science. It was the fact we just did something that was in the hearts of so many people, and they thought it was the right thing to do. They just didn't know anybody that did it.
Yeah, and I guess that's also the community that came together, yeah? Because suddenly it was actually you made it okay to do it in business, yeah?
Then we bring the community together at conferences, but the community comes together to improve the system, okay? We all are playing it. We all get together, and then we sit there and say, what can we do better?
Great. Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes all to that, and the books as well. There's also the book Stake in the Outcome, which is more about creating business owners instead of employees. Sending you and the team power and energy, and happy holiday season when you get to this.
Michael, thank you for everything you do, and thank you for providing us the opportunity to tell the story. Okay. You're the gatekeepers, and we do really, really appreciate everything. And if I can do anything for you in the future, please let us know, and let's keep the relationship going. You're a good guy.
Thank you, Jack.
Happy holidays to you as well. And don't be depressed. Be happy.